This is a book I wrote some years ago called Nampally Road, and I was living in Hyderabad at the time, and at the center of it is the question of something that occurred, an actual event in Nallakunta police station, where a woman called Ramiza Bey and her husband, they were just coming home, and she was taken into a police station and gang raped by the police, and it was a terrible incident. Everyone was shocked, the people were outraged, and they burned down the police station. And it became a huge incident in India. You know, feminists, jurists, all sorts of people responded to it with great shock. And somehow, you know, I was very young at the time, and I was living in Hyderabad, so I went to see the police station, you know, and I started to imagine a character. I'm not really a fiction writer, but I imagined a character a bit like myself, a young woman teaching in a college, who leaves the classroom and goes to see this woman who's still in the police station. And the entire scene of the novel unfolds around this. And within it, we have Hyderabad and its streets and the life of Hyderabad. And I started composing it shortly after this terrible incident. And I finished it some years later in New York City, where I live. So it's a book, it's a Hyderabad book, but it was composed, you know, partly here, partly in the mountains in the Himalayas, partly in New York. And Orient Black Swan has just done a new edition with a little preface by Geeta Hariharan. Well, some of them are invented, some are composite figures. For instance, very important in this story is the protagonist, whose name is Meena, that's what she's called. She's living in the home of a wonderful woman doctor who has a clinic for poor people. And she goes with this doctor to the clinic, and you know, there's some incidents there which are also drawn up from real life, but they're fictionalized, it's not autobiography. Similarly, some of the scenes in the classroom, you see, I was there at the very inception of what is now the Central University of Hyderabad, and we were teaching in the Golden Threshold. Do you know what that is? It's Sarojini Naidu's house. It's a very beautiful house, and Golden Threshold is also the title of one of her books of poetry. I mean, in those days, you know, when it came out in the early 20th century. And so the university was using it, you know, as a venue for philosophy and English. It was a very small university in those days, so it was a very intimate group. And so many of the scenes are set also in the Golden Threshold and around it, just immediately in front of it. And tomorrow, Sachidananda Mohanty is having a conversation for an hour with me about this book called Nampally Road Then and Now, because, you know, when you name something after a street, it becomes fictionalized, but also it is there, it is the real street. So it's always that way in which the imagination takes something that's actual and then transforms it. So I mean, it's not like being a reporter, for instance, you know, where you feel that it has to have the veracity of the fact insofar as you can discover it. This is much more a book of exploration in that way. It's a very simple book because it's just the bewilderment and the emotions of the protagonist as a young woman confronting this strange and chaotic world. So it's not a book of entering into other characters in great depth. It's more a book of impressions and emotions, I think. You know, I think that I started writing close to the event, but I always need a gap in time to write. I can't, you know, I think the only time that I've actually penned something very shortly after is after 9/11. I made a cycle of very short poems. But even those I took some time. You know, I always need retrospect so that what is out there enters the imagination and then you craft something. So it wasn't nostalgia, it was almost having a space within which all these events could come to life. Oh, you know, it took very long because it's very curious, but in fact, I had written a book that was about 4 times that length, and then I realized it doesn't work. And in between, I wrote 1 or 2 books of poetry. Then I looked at it and I thought, you know, what is the heart of this? It's the story of what happened in Hyderabad. And so I cut it down. And the novel first came out in 1991 in the United States, and it was subsequently published a year or 2 later by Disha Orient Black Swan, as it is now, and now they've reissued it. I have done it. I have written fiction twice, but my natural bent is towards poetry. You know, the compression, the lyric image, almost the kind of dream state that a poem makes. That is perhaps where I'm most at home.